Turn and face the strange changes. Just gonna have to be a different man. Time may change me, but I can't trace time. These are the words of the immortal David Bowie in his great song Changes. And that's really going to be the last topic we talk about this semester is somewhat organizational development, but essentially initiating, sustaining, and creating change in an organization. And we're going to look at two theories on how to do this. So let's go ahead and get started. Our first theory up here is Cotter's Eightfold Theory. And it really does a good job of providing a start to finish approach for instituting organizational development and organizational changes. Starting with lighting a fire, sometimes I see this presented as establishing a mood or establishing an impetus for change, right? Moving on to getting the right people on board. These are going to be stakeholders. These could be members of the board. These could be managers. These could be um, stockholders. These could be anybody who needs to be on board in order to implement the change. We're then going to paint a compelling picture, right? This is where you're going to explain what we're doing now and how much better we could make things. But then we need to communicate the change more widely down to non-key stakeholders. Other stakeholders, definitely this would include employees, your day-to-day customers, other people who are certainly important to your business, but aren't the ones who are going to be instituting and sustaining the change at first. They're going to be the ones who ultimately carry out the change, but they're the ones that you get on board next. Then we're going to remove the obstacles and empower people to act. If you work in an organization that has unions, you're often going to need union buy in. If you work in an organization that has a lot of skilled workers who have many opportunities to jump ship or have high tech skills, you're going to need them to agree to institute the change. Step six is really the only one I don't like. The reason I don't like this is I tend to draw a dichotomy between quick wins and organizational development. Quick wins are things that you could just get done without much of a plan, right? You ask your run of the mill employee. It's basically instead of being a top down approach like Cotter suggests, we make it more of a bottom up approach where we go to our end customers, we go to our employees, we go to our frontline workers, and we say to them, you know, what is not good or what is not as good as it could be, and what can we do to fix it quickly. And a lot of these are just going to be minor changes. Little quick wins can occur all the time. It doesn't matter whether you're changing up the way that food is ordered at a restaurant, or the way that a certain process is done in the pharmacy when filling a prescription, or the way a certain manufacturing process is done with certain safety standards or with certain inefficiencies maybe built into the process. Not that you want to create an unsafe work environment or that you want to disrupt the normal flow of business, but you can make little incremental improvements without an organizational development strategy. So that's why I think it's a little odd that Cotter includes that. Next, keep it moving. Of course, that makes sense. Once you have gotten over the barriers to change and implemented them, it's very, very easy for people to burn out or for people to become creatures of habit and to fall back into the sort of previous behavior, the one that you're trying to extinguish. And finally, make the changes stick. Of course, this is the hardest part. Once you've instituted a change, once you've gotten people to adopt it, once you've gotten them out of the habit of the old process or the old way of thinking or the old set of values, and you've now gotten these new processes established, you have to make it stick. I think one of the best examples I've ever seen in my personal life is for a while when we were switching over from paper charts to EHR at the hospital where I worked at that time, there was a lot of resistance. Even though the government was giving us a lot of money, even though we all knew at the end of the day that this would be a better way to track patients and prevent mistakes, there were a lot of older people in the profession. There still are. And for them, adopting to new technology is hard. So it took a huge amount of effort going through all eight of these steps again and again and again, it felt like, before we got there, before we successfully switched from being a paper based company to a tech based company, one using EHRs exclusively for patient care. And I think Cotter in this graph from our chapter is really, really brilliant in elucidating this point that change, organizational development, culture shifting is a circle. It's a never ending change. You make the changes stick, And then you got to light the fire again to change because are always in flux. Things are always up in the air. And I think Cotter very wisely acknowledges that. Maybe remove the quick wins or maybe take it away from the circle and make it its own separate little thing. And you got me fully on board. But otherwise, I like this model a great deal. Moving on from Cotter, we move into AI, or appreciative inquiry. And this theory starts in a similar place. It's identifying and appreciating the best of what exists, and then dreaming, imagining what could be, designing, and coming up with a destiny, a sustaining formula. And so, unlike Cotter's theory, which is very much circular and it requires a lot more buy in, AI is sort of looking where we are today, imagining a better future, designing it carefully, and then implementing it. And so it takes fewer steps, but it also doesn't repeat. To me, it looks a lot more like what this textbook model shows, namely that there's a topic, or it could be anything. It could be the mission statement, it could be a specific design process, or it could be taken all the way up to the scale of organizational development, an OD topic, and made to be something that occurs across the board. I think a great example of AI being successfully used is when you see companies change up their advertising lingo or they change up the way they operate or message. I think a fantastic example of this was when Old Spice, was when I was younger as a company for old men. My grandfather used Old Spice, but it wasn't really a product for younger people. Until it is, they got the Old Spice guy and later the Old Spice man, Isaiah Mustafa and Terry Crews. And what they did is they completely revitalized the brand, changed it from a product that was meant for men to one that was being sold to women. So that was the big shift there. The man, what is it? I'm the man your man could smell like campaign. Brilliant pivot there in the marketing. And it very much uses AI system, right? There was a discovery like, hey, we realize we have a great brand, a solid lineup of products. We like that. We wish we could increase sales. Unfortunately, the demographic we're appealing to now is old and not getting any younger. Designing, hiring an outside marketing firm, designing a rebranding, designing a launch, focusing on women as customers, since their studies showed that about 40% of men's healthcare products and personal products were bought by women. And then once they successfully made this pivot, they have sustained it. I have never seen an Old Spice commercial since then aimed towards older men. They're pretty much all aimed either towards women or towards younger men directly. Bring it all together here. What do we want to go from here? Well, I think one of the first things we should acknowledge is the things they have in common. Both these are tools for organizational development. Both of these tools are means to institute and sustain a change. And I think that's a really fantastic perspective, a good solid theory we can use. And I think that's really mostly where their similarities end. They have the same goal in mind, and they go about with similar tools going through it, but not necessarily the same tools. So starting with some contrast here, Cotter's method really doesn't look back. It's really not a historical model. Basically, step one is already igniting a fire. It's already saying, let's get this ball rolling. I think Cotter also wisely is fantastic at using a top down approach. While I do not like step six in Cotter's theory, mostly because I would think of that not as an organizational development tool, but as just more like a quality of life tool. I give the example of it being a bottom up tool. I think a great thing about using quick wins is you go to employees, you go to customers, you go to frontline workers, you go to people who are out there every day in the field, and you say, what could we be doing better? What little tips and strategies, what little things have you learned from your experience being on the job, shopping with us, being around our organization that you think would help us improve? And these are a lot of little things. You can do them very fast and they can be built upon with very little effort. In many cases, sometimes they do require a deeper level of change. But a lot of times, these quick wins are better suited to a bottom up approach. Otter's theory is very much a top down. It's going to require a charismatic leader, or better yet, as we discussed last week, a transformational leader, right? He's going to need to be, or she's going to need to be, somebody who goes out there, lights a fire in people, gets key stakeholders on board, formulates a real plan, overcomes those barriers. It's somebody who's transforming an organization in a very real way, getting buy-in from all stakeholders. First, key stakeholders like the executives or the board, or whoever else is relevant in the company. If it's a church, maybe the parish council, something like this, right? You're getting some buy-in from them. Eventually, you're going to have to get everyone on board, though. This is where I talk about, maybe working with union leadership, maybe working with your frontline employees again, but sort of convincing them of the need to change and showing them the direction you're going to lead them. Fantastic. Overcome those barriers. And then, of course, the hardest part of Potter's theory is implementation and making it stick, making people internalize his message. And a charismatic leader could probably get you a long way on that. But at the end of the day, only a transformational leader is truly going to help people internalize the new change and make it a part of themselves. And Cotter notices that this is a never ending process. And I think that's rather important. As far as AI goes, I tend to think of AI as a better marketing strategy. I gave the example of Old Spice and I would stand by it. I think it's a great PR tool. I think it's a great tool for companies which have a long history or have a history that is important and can be built on. This can be done very catastrophically. New Coke is a fantastic example of that, right? While many people preferred the flavor of New Coke, there was a vociferous minority who just didn't. And if you think about it, Coca Cola had built up 50, 60, 70 years of telling people, you need Coke. Like, it is the most tasty beverage. And then they say, oh, we're going to change the formula. That was a nightmare. That was a disaster for them. And it makes sense. They failed to use an AI approach. They should have looked back and said, what things make our company or have made our company great, appreciate that, and then pivot. I think that was the brilliance of Old Spice, was recognizing that their brand was solid, had a legacy, it was well known, and then also pivoting to a different strategy, namely marketing to women and marketing a product for younger people in order to grow their customer base. And it worked out very successfully for them. So I definitely applaud them on that. And I think that's really the big difference between the two. Potter's theory is great for transformational leadership. It's also great for companies which are younger or more agile. I think Google or Facebook or even Apple could do a great job using Potter's theory in many different applications if they needed to modify something about their organization. AI probably works a little better for companies that are a little more storied. Your Harley Davidsons, your Coca Colas, your Fords and GMs of the world. They can use the AI a little more effectively. Now, they could start with AI and then bring in Cotter. They could start with some quick wins and realize how that could feed into an AI solution. But all of those are going to be a little bit beyond the scope of what we want to cover here. And I think that's where I want to wrap it up. It's been a great semester. My self reflection paper sort of includes a little bit of information from these videos over the past 7 weeks. And I hope that you find it appealing as well to see how I've integrated everything together. And while I love the technical skills I learned from making these videos, I think overall the transformational aspect has been the growth of ethical considerations and the growth of transformational leadership approaches in order to lead organizations and develop organizations in a way that's both ethical, sustainable, and transformational, inspiring and motivating others. And I think putting it all together in these videos has been a fantastic way to reflect upon each week's developments, and writing it out just sort of cements everything and brings it all together. Thank you for watching all of these videos, and thank you very much for all the things that we have learned together in this class. It's really been a wonderful time. Thank you.